British sci-fi in the 1970s wasn't just about rubber monsters and cheap spacesuits. It was about bold ideas that looked decades ahead, predicting the very technology we live with today. Artificial intelligence, genetic tinkering, cybernetic bodies. These weren't Silicon Valley dreams. They were low-budget visions filmed on damp sound stages. So, how did Britain, often dismissed as the underdog of cinema, end up sketching out our future? Let's dive into 12 strange films that saw tomorrow before anyone else did. Doppelganger, also known as Journey to the Far Side of the Sun, 1970, A Mirror Earth, Hiding Behind the Sunday. That's the eerie hook of Doppelganger, Jerry Anderson's first live-action feature after his hit puppet shows. It sounds like pulp fantasy, but the film quietly predicted ideas that still obsess scientists: parallel worlds, orbital surveillance, and the paranoia of information flipping against us. The plot follows European astronauts sent to confirm the existence of this mysterious twin planet. When their mission crashes, they wake believing they are back home. Slowly, they notice everything is reversed. Words are written backward, and even simple objects betray a subtle difference. It's less a space adventure and more a meditation on how fragile reality feels when technology uncovers truths we can't handle. Audiences in the early 70s didn't embrace it. Too bleak, too slow, critics said. But today it feels prophetic. Think about our obsession with digital twins, simulations, and mirror datasets. Doppelganger asked, long before the internet, what happens when our reflection becomes indistinguishable from the real thing? Anderson's sleek production design adds to the unease. This wasn't a glossy fantasy, but a sterile, bureaucratic vision of space travel. It suggested that the future wouldn't feel like wonder. It would feel like paperwork, politics, and suspicion. Looking back, it predicted not just technology, but the mood surrounding it. Why does it matter? Because Doppelganger was one of the first British films to suggest that discovery doesn't always equal progress. Sometimes, technology only deepens mistrust. That's a message still buzzing in our ears half a century later. The Mind of Mr. Soames, 1970. Imagine waking up as a grown man, but with the mind of a child. That's the disturbing premise of The Mind of Mr. Soames, starring Terence Stamp. On paper, it looks like a medical drama, but dig deeper, and it's a chilling prediction of neuroscience experiments and the ethical dilemmas that still dog brain research today. John Soames has spent his life in a coma. Doctors attempt a breakthrough procedure to bring him back, and against all odds, it works. But instead of triumph, what follows is tragedy. He can walk and talk, but mentally, he's a blank slate. Scientists want to study him, parents want to protect him, and journalists circle like vultures. Soames becomes less a person than a test subject, pulled apart by competing agendas. The brilliance lies in how the film frames science, not as salvation, but as exploitation. The same technology that gave him life strips him of dignity. Society doesn't know whether to treat him like a miracle or a laboratory sample. That's an uncomfortable echo of today's debates about artificial intelligence, human cloning, and experimental surgery. Just because we can push the frontier, should we? Stamp's performance makes it unforgettable. He shifts from wide-eyed innocence to raw panic, embodying the nightmare of being thrust into a world without context. The story refuses to offer easy answers. It leaves you wondering if technological triumphs sometimes create more suffering than they solve. Critics at the time were baffled. Was it science fiction, a thriller, or social commentary? The answer is all of them, wrapped into one unsettling package. And that's why it deserves recognition today. The Mind of Mr. Soames wasn't just predicting breakthroughs in neuroscience, it was predicting the moral chaos that would come with them. Moon 02, 1970. What if the moon wasn't just for astronauts, but for hustlers, prospectors, and shady corporations? That was the wild gamble of Moon 02, a film marketed as the first space western. It came from Hammer Films, the studio better known for gothic horror, and it mashed together cowboys and lunar mining. The result? A campy spectacle that, strangely enough, predicted the modern gold rush around space resources. The film follows an ex-astronaut turned salvage operator who takes on odd jobs on the moon. His latest assignment drags him into a tangle of corporate greed, land claims, and outlaw-style brawls in lunar bars. On the surface, it's silly, brightly painted sets, clunky costumes, and dialogue that often tips into parody. But beneath the camp is a startlingly forward-looking idea that the moon wouldn't be about exploration, but exploitation. Think about today's headlines. Private companies racing to mine asteroids, billionaires pitching colonies on Mars, debates about who owns extraterrestrial resources. Moon 02 tapped into that future decades before it became serious news. It treated the moon not as a noble frontier, but as a lawless territory, waiting to be carved up by whoever had the money and muscle. Critics in 1970 mocked it. The Guardian famously dismissed it as a camp disaster. Audiences laughed it off too, yet with hindsight, it feels oddly sharp. It predicted the corporate scramble to claim space rights and the way the dream of exploration might collapse into a fight for ownership. Moon 02 may look goofy today, but its underlying vision was dead on. The space race wasn't going to end in flag planting, it was going to end in boardrooms and contracts. That's the kind of foresight only sci-fi, even in its strangest form, can deliver. ZPG. Zero Population Growth, 1972. Imagine being told you cannot have a child for 30 years. That's the chilling setup of ZPG, a dystopian film starring Oliver Reed and Geraldine Chaplin. Released during the height of overpopulation fears, it painted a future where the government clamps down on birth rates with brutal efficiency. Families are given robotic dolls to raise as substitutes, while real children are outlawed. It sounds extreme, but look at the themes. ZPG anticipated debates about population control, government surveillance of family life, and even the eerie possibility of AI-powered parenting. In a world now filled with lifelike companion robots, virtual infants, and apps that monitor fertility cycles, the film's predictions don't feel so far-fetched. The story follows a couple who defy the rules and secretly bring a child into the world. Suddenly they're fugitives, hiding from neighbors, dodging patrols, and trying to shield their baby from a society obsessed with conformity. The atmosphere is suffocating: gray sets, sterile homes, and constant reminders that individual choice has been erased in the name of the greater good. Critics dismissed it as bleak propaganda. Some argued it lacked action or heart. But what makes it powerful is precisely that suffocating tone. It wasn't selling escapism, it was holding up a warning sign. ZPG suggested that once technology is used to regulate the most personal parts of life, humanity itself begins to wither. Reed's performance anchors the film with a raw desperation. His quiet rage at the system feels timeless. Watching it now, you can't help but wonder, how much of our personal choices could be controlled by invisible systems in the future? ZPG dared to ask the question 50 years ago. The Asphyx, 1972. What if you could trap death itself in a machine? That's the morbid brilliance of The Asphyx, a gothic-flavored sci-fi that combined Victorian melodrama with futuristic obsession. Robert Stevens plays Sir Hugo Cunningham, a scientist who believes he can literally capture the spirit of death using a strange photographic process. Every time someone is about to die, a dark shadow appears, the Asphyx. Cunningham becomes convinced that if he can trap it with his device, he can achieve immortality. The film builds from curiosity to obsession as experiments spiral out of control. Loved ones suffer, disasters pile up, and the quest for eternal life turns into a nightmare of unintended consequences. On the surface, the Asphyx feels like a period piece, filled with candlelit labs, creaking mansions, and a gloomy Gothic mood. But underneath, it was eerily forward-looking. It anticipated our obsession with bioimaging, cryonics, and the dream of using technology to defeat aging itself. Today, entire industries are devoted to anti-aging science, life extension, and digital immortality. The Asphyx asked first, what happens if we succeed? Critics at the time shrugged it off as slow and melodramatic. But over the years, it's earned a cult following. Fans admire its audacity to mix the supernatural with proto-scientific ideas. And the deeper message lingers. Technology can't erase mortality without erasing humanity too. The Asphyx wasn't just about ghosts or machines, it was about hubris. It warned that chasing eternal life might destroy the very life we're trying to protect. That makes it one of the most quietly prophetic sci-fi films Britain ever produced. The Final Program, 1973. Imagine a scientist who looks less like a lab rat and more like a rock star. That's Jerry Cornelius in The Final Program, a psychedelic roller coaster directed by Robert Fuest. Based on Michael Moorcock's cult novels, it's part science fiction, part black comedy, and part fever dream. At its heart is one of the boldest predictions of the decade, the blending of human beings into a new form of life. Cornelius, played by Blending, John Finch, drifts through a collapsing society filled with conspiracies, strange experiments, and moral chaos. The film barely bothers with traditional storytelling. It's a sequence of surreal encounters, sharp suits, and bizarre laboratories that look like they were designed by glam rockers. And then comes the kicker, a scientific project to merge two humans into one superior being. Yes, a literal experiment in transhumanism. Back in 1973, audiences didn't know what to make of it. Some laughed, others walked out, and critics dismissed it as incoherent nonsense. But look at it now. It eerily anticipates debates about merging human biology with technology, the rise of gene editing, and even the idea of digital consciousness. The final program suggested that the future wouldn't just be about gadgets, it would be about rewriting what it means to be human. Visually, it's dazzling. Every frame oozes 70s style, making it feel less like a film and more like a hallucination. But beneath the chaos is a daring question. What if progress means destroying individuality? That's why it deserves recognition today. The final program wasn't just strange, it was visionary. Who, 1974, Cold War paranoia meets the nightmare of cybernetics. Who might be one of the most underrated British-American collaborations of the 70s, but its central idea was decades ahead of its time. Imagine a brilliant scientist horribly injured, then rebuilt with a robotic body. When he's returned to the West, nobody knows if it's really him or an imposter. That scientist is Lucas Martino. Covered in metal, his face hidden, his identity becomes a question mark. Friends, colleagues, even his government doubt him. Is he a loyal genius or a Soviet trick? The story unfolds less like an action film and more like a psychological battle, probing the horror of being trapped in a body that makes you unrecognizable. Back in 1974, audiences didn't see it as groundbreaking. Low-budget effects, uneven pacing, and a muted release kept it buried. But its ideas were astonishingly predictive. Today, we live in an age of biometric scans, facial recognition, and debates about whether advanced prosthetics blur the line between man and machine. Who asked that question before cyberpunk was even a word? What makes it haunting is Martino's desperation. He pleads to be believed, but technology has erased the very thing that makes him human: trust. It's less about gadgets and more about identity. Who are you if no one else can recognize you? Critics missed it, but looking back, Who feels like a raw blueprint for themes that dominate modern science fiction. It wasn't perfect, but it had vision, and that vision still resonates today. Phase 4, 1974. A sci-fi movie about ants? Sounds laughable. Until you see it. Directed by legendary graphic designer Saul Bass, Phase 4 turned an insect invasion into one of the eeriest predictions of artificial intelligence and swarm technology. Forget explosions and monster thrills, this is about evolution taking a terrifying shortcut. The setup is deceptively simple. A cosmic event triggers ants to evolve into hyper-intelligent beings. Two scientists investigate, setting up a remote lab in the desert. What they discover is chilling. The ants are not random pests. They move in patterns, they strategize, and they begin reshaping the environment with cold precision. Bass filmed extraordinary close-ups of ants, turning them into alien masterminds. The silence, the patterns, the sense of something vast and organized. It feels less like a bug movie and more like an art installation. Critics in 1974 didn't get it. They called it boring, too slow, too strange. Audiences stayed away. But in hindsight, Phase 4 predicted one of the defining technologies of our time: swarm intelligence. Today, researchers use AI to mimic insect behavior, from drones that fly in formation to algorithms that optimize traffic and logistics. The film imagined that intelligence could emerge not from one brilliant mind, but from countless tiny interactions. That's the backbone of modern computing. The studio famously cut Bass's surreal ending, but even in its trimmed form, Phase 4 crawls under your skin. It whispers a warning. The next dominant intelligence on Earth may not look like us at all, and that's a prediction worth remembering. The Mutations, 1974. Cross humans with plants and see what happens. That was the bizarre pitch behind The Mutations, a low-budget British sci-fi oddity starring Donald Pleasance. On the surface, It looked like a pulpy horror flick, but buried inside was a startling prediction of genetic engineering and the ethical minefields it would create. Pleasance plays Professor Noelter, a scientist obsessed with creating a new race by splicing human DNA with plants. His experiments lead to grotesque hybrids, part human, part flora, hidden away from society. The results are both tragic and disturbing. Some of the creations are treated as freak show attractions, while others lash out in confusion and pain. Beneath the campy makeup and lurid visuals lies a chilling idea. What happens when science starts rewriting the basic building blocks of life? Back in 1974, the concept felt outlandish, even laughable. But look at the world today. Genetic modification, CRISPR technology, and debates about designer babies echo the questions, the mutations, posed decades ago. Where do we draw the line between innovation and violation? Are scientists exploring possibilities or playing with lives they don't fully understand? Critics trashed the film. They called it exploitative, cheap, and sensational. And yes, the execution is rough, but the vision was uncanny. It suggested that tampering with biology, even with the best intentions, could create more horror than hope. Pleasance, always intense, carries the film with icy conviction. His character isn't a cartoon villain. He's a chilling portrait of obsession, the kind of genius who justifies any cruelty in the name of progress. Watching it now, the mutations feels less like schlock and more like a twisted parable. It saw where science was heading, and it warned us with a story that still feels uncomfortably relevant. The Changes, 1975. What if one morning, everyone suddenly turned against technology? That's the terrifying premise of The Changes, a BBC miniseries that scarred an entire generation of children in the mid-70s. Unlike most theatrical sci-fi, this was made for TV, but it deserves a place here because of its bold and unsettling predictions. The story begins with a mysterious force sweeping across Britain. Ordinary people, without warning, begin smashing machines, cars, radios, even kitchen appliances, in a frenzy. Civilization collapses almost overnight. Society regresses to a medieval state, where mobs rule, superstition takes hold, and anyone who clings to technology is branded an outcast. For a so-called children's program, it was shockingly bleak. The young protagonist wanders through a hostile world where neighbors become enemies, witch hunts resurface, and survival depends on abandoning the very tools that once defined modern life. No monsters, no aliens, just the terrifying idea that we could destroy ourselves in a fit of collective fear. Looking at it today, The Changes feels chillingly prophetic. It foresaw how fragile our relationship with technology really is. We rely on it completely, yet we also fear it deeply. Cyber attacks, blackouts, or sudden mass rejection of digital systems could throw society into chaos in ways that echo this haunting series. Critics at the time called it too grim for young audiences. But decades later, those who watched it as children remember it vividly. The lesson wasn't subtle. Without technology, civilization teeters on collapse. The Changes dared to imagine what would happen if our dependency snapped, and that's why it still resonates. Quatermass IV, The Quatermass Conclusion, 1979. By the end of the decade, British sci-fi had grown darker than ever. Nowhere was that clearer than in The Quatermass Conclusion, the final chapter of Nigel Kneale's iconic series. While earlier Quatermass tales focused on alien threats, this installment shifted to something eerier, a society crumbling from within, ripe for manipulation. Professor Quatermass, now an older and wearier man, investigates strange disappearances across Britain. Groups of young people are drawn to ancient stone circles, believing they will be transported by cosmic forces. The truth is far more sinister. Aliens are harvesting their life energy in a ritualistic purge. Released in 1979, it landed in a Britain already anxious about social decay, economic collapse, and generational divides. Instead of heroes in triumph, the film gave audiences despair. The country is portrayed as broken, lawless, and vulnerable. Quatermass himself is no longer a confident scientist, but a frail figure fighting a hopeless battle. Audiences weren't ready for such bleakness. Many critics dismissed it as depressing and overly strange. Yet with hindsight, it feels strikingly prescient. Its themes of mass persuasion, cult-like movements, and youth manipulated by forces they can't see echo eerily in today's world of digital influence and online radicalization. The Quatermass Conclusion wasn't just another alien invasion tale. It was a meditation on how vulnerable societies can be when trust, authority, and stability collapse. That's what makes it prophetic. It showed that the greatest danger wasn't the alien presence, it was humanity's readiness to surrender itself to illusion. Warlords of Atlantis, 1978. Before Star Wars fever swept the world, Britain offered its own brand of pulp science fiction. Warlords of Atlantis, directed by Kevin Connor, might look like a Saturday matinee romp on the surface, but hidden beneath the rubber monsters and adventure plotlines are predictions about undersea exploration, lost civilizations, and the technologies we might one day find in the deep. The story follows a group of explorers led by Doug McClure, who stumble upon the legendary city of Atlantis while searching for new frontiers beneath the ocean. Instead of a crumbling ruin, they discover a society of telepathic overlords, advanced energy systems, and creatures unlike anything seen before. The film dives headfirst into pulp spectacle, giant octopuses, crumbling palaces, and relentless battles, but behind the camp is an idea that feels strangely ahead of its time: the ocean as Earth's final technological frontier. In the 1970s, deep-sea exploration was still in its infancy. Submersibles were rare, and the idea of finding advanced technology underwater felt like pure fantasy. Yet today, we talk seriously about harvesting resources from the ocean floor, tapping geothermal vents for power, and even searching Earth's seas for microbial life, with clues to future medicine. Warlords of Atlantis took those whispers of possibility and turned them into wild, cinematic visions. Critics dismissed it as outdated even at release. Compared to the sleek spectacle of American blockbusters, its colorful sets and rubbery monsters seemed quaint, but for young audiences, it was magical. And with hindsight, its predictions about undersea exploration and hidden energy sources seem eerily on target. Warlords of Atlantis wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. It dared to imagine that our future discoveries might not come from the stars, but from the depths beneath our feet. That vision makes it a fitting final chapter in Britain's bold, strange, and prophetic sci-fi of the 70s. So there you have it, 12 British sci-fi films from the 1970s that didn't just entertain, they predicted the very world we now live in. From genetic engineering to artificial intelligence, from space colonization to society's fragile bond with technology, these films dared to ask questions most blockbusters avoided. Which one struck you as the most prophetic? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and share this with someone who loves hidden gems. Remember, the future was already imagined, it's just up to us to recognize it.